He's one of the biggest personalities on the #1 radio station in the entire state of Arkansas, and he's from right here in the River Valley. We are talking to Jeff Allen right after this on the Spotlight. From the beautiful Olathe Studios in downtown Russellville, we welcome you into the Spotlight. Thanks so much for joining us. If you are in the market to buy or sell your home, give us a call today. It's 479-968-5668 or cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. We've got no time to waste. He's one of the busiest men in all of media. He is one of the biggest personalities on the #1 radio station in the state of Arkansas. He's from right here in Russellville. It's an honor to have Jeff Allen in the studio. Jeff, thank you so much for being here, my friend. This is awesome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Man, I have been waiting on this interview for a while because I am fascinated by your journey. I mean, I'm fascinated by radio as it is. I'm fascinated by local radio. I've been in the business for a long time.
Right.
But the idea of the aura around Magic 105.
Oh, yeah.
The aura around 94.1.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you are a prominent personality, and we're on both of those stations
for a long time.
Right, but you're from right here in Russellville.
Yeah,
I don't think most people know that.
I thought everybody knew that.
I don't know that. I don't know. I don't know if it might be one of the worst kept secrets and also best kept secrets in all of Russellville. So how did this happen?
People ask me from time to time, did you go to school for this? What led you to be a DJ? I was in a totally different career field before this. And I had a friend that was doing mobile DJ parties, and I had free time to kill. And he offered me, he said, hey, if you'll help me set up some of these mobile parties, I'll throw you a few bucks and you can have some fun, a chance to party on the weekend or whatever. So I started kind of tagging along on these mobile DJ gigs. And then an instance came up to where somebody got sick, and he called me and said, hey, somebody's sick. I need somebody to cover this party. Can you do this? You've been out enough with me,
Right.
So I ended up DJing my first party. It was a class reunion, and it went pretty well. And that led to me doing more of those, and I ended up doing one for a bunch of frat guys, like a frat party. One of the guys at the frat party happened to be a bartender at a club, and said, hey, we need a DJ at our club. You sound pretty good on the mic. What do you think about coming down a couple nights a week to our bar? So that led me to the bar to be a DJ, which is where I met one of your other guests, Sharp Dunaway, who said, you sound pretty good on the mic. We might have an opening at our radio station.
So it was
I fell into it.
It was Sharp who broke you in?
No, Sharp told me I would be good on the radio.
Okay.
He didn't break me in.
So how did that occur? What was the transition like?
That's a fuzzy memory now, actually. I ended up kind of putting together a tape. I went down to KVOM in Morrilton and recorded some stuff because I'd done some ads for the club already, some radio ads. And I sent a tape to the radio station and got a part-time weekend on-call job.
It's fascinating to me, too, that you were in a different career field.
Mm-hmm.
What was it?
I worked at Arkansas Nuclear One first, and I took that career path, led me to Phoenix, Arizona, and New Orleans, and some other places in the country, working on power plants.
So as an engineer or what?
Mechanic.
Okay, hold up. I'm really glad. Okay, here's a little bit of the secret of the show, folks. I don't really like doing a pre-interview because I like being surprised. You were in mechanical engineering.
So to speak, yeah.
And then you become one of the biggest personalities in Arkansas radio.
If you say so.
Well, I would think that most people would. But that's interesting to me because the personality doesn't seem... It's strange. I noticed this with Sharp. When I worked over at the Buzz, I noticed this with a lot of those guys too. Basil being an exception. That that some of the biggest personalities in this industry are very publicly extroverted, but very privately introverted. And the life of a mechanical engineer would not, in my mind, lend itself towards being a disc jockey at one point or another.
I didn't plan on it.
How does that work? How does that work in your mind?
I didn't really think about it. Like I said, I was doing that. That was a good living, good money.
Sure.
But that kind of job, you work 6, 8, 10 weeks, and then you're off for 2 months until another job comes up, or 6 weeks or whatever. So it was in those dead times that I was looking for stuff to do, which is how I ended up on the mobile DJ service, because I didn't have to report the income.
Right, exactly. Well, okay. That sounds more like radio personalities.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay, that sounds bad.
And it just, something about it clicked. And then I had an opportunity to start doing it full time, and I decided to make a change. I actually started here in Russellville with KCJC.
Okay, so you were at KCJC doing what?
I was the midday host.
Okay, what time period was that?
That was 10 to, I think, 3 or 2 or 3 back then.
What years?
Oh, geez.
Is this mid-90s, early 90s?
Early 90s.
Early 90s, okay. Now, this leads to a whole nother line of questioning that I wasn't planning on. So you were working at KCJC at a time where KCJC was not quite as dominant in this area as it is now. I'm guessing back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was still pretty much a carved territory, right?
It was about a 50-50 split.
50-50 split, okay. Did you work with Johnny Story at all?
I know Johnny. I don't think we ever worked together there.
Mm-hmm. What is that relationship like? You and Johnny and some of the local guys.
It's great.
Yeah.
You know, Johnny's one of the old school guys. He's a nice hometown guy. His head never got too big for the space. He's just a very genuine, likable guy, and very talented.
No, absolutely. Had the opportunity to go statewide more than once, and just really enjoyed being here. And I always admired that. I always admired that about Johnny, and I always admired that about Tom Campley. You grew up in Russellville, right? Mm-hmm. As born here, raised here. What's your early life like?
That's born here, raised here. Went to school here. I was a Cyclone.
You're a Cyclone, Wonder Boy.
Nope, I went straight to work out of high school.
Okay, so help me understand. From the time that you are going out of high school and into Arkansas Nuclear One, mm-hmm. This fits, you're making good money. Was there something about, however, like, Sharp and I talked about this.
Okay.
That there seems to be a common thread among personalities that they need an audience. That usually they were either the really, really smart, quiet kid in school, or they were the class clown, but it was very little in between. At least that's what I've noticed.
I don't think it was that way for me at all.
What was it for you?
I didn't ever feel like I needed an audience. I certainly wasn't a class clown. I was friends with the class clown.
Right.
I kind of clicked with every group in high school. You know, athletes, nerds. I got along with everybody. I didn't run with one group. Were
you an athlete?
A little bit. I kept tearing my knees up.
Oh, is that what happened? Okay, got it. You know, I'm sure that you would be surprised by this, but I was undrafted, even though I tried desperately to get into the NFL draft. I don't understand how that happened, but, you know, there's that part of it. Magic 105.
Okay.
I think there are so many people who are, if they're radio nerds like I am, Magic 105 is kind of this holy grail of untouchable aura. Really intriguing.
It was.
Okay, that was the next question. Is it as magical as the name would have suggested?
It was.
Let's talk about it.
I can't say is, but it was. I was, like I said, working at KCJC, but I got a part-time spot at Magic 105, like a fill-in on a Saturday night or a Sunday afternoon, just whenever they needed somebody was off. And so I was going up there every week or so to do a show just as a fill-in guy. And that was a dream for me because I grew up listening to that station.
Right.
And this was the Mount Everest of, wow, I'm actually a part of this now.
Right.
And at that point in time, Magic 105 was the biggest most flamboyant thing. There was nothing else. You know, you had Craig over on B98. You had other personalities, Bob Robbins, guys like that. But Magic 105 was it. And the ratings we pulled in back then were just unbelievable, almost unheard of.
Right.
And we had a morning guy, a midday guy, an afternoon guy, and a night girl that had all been there for 10 plus years, which is also very rare.
Right.
But it made it really special. And I had left, actually moved to Nashville, Tennessee, was working in radio in Nashville, Tennessee, and might have stayed there. And who knows, you know, what a different path might have been if I'd taken that job and stayed with it. But I got a call from Tom Wood. He said, the afternoon spot's coming open. David Allen Ross has turned in his notice. I know you were interested in that. Do you want to come back and do a tryout for that? So that led me back here. And I didn't get the job, but I got a regular spot on the air doing overnights. So I moved back here from Nashville and ended up full-time at Magic 105. And worked from there up to 7 to midnight, worked my way up the ladder.
Magic 105 is I never wanted to do anything other than television and radio. And I was a nerd. I was all-consuming. As a kid, wasn't really allowed to listen to Magic 105. And that was probably for the best.
Probably.
But when I look at it, and when I see radio in its totality, I think I'm not sure how that all came together. So here's the really interesting question. I know that Tommy Smith is you know, synonymous with Magic 105, but who was the real Magic? How did this group of people come together to make this thing work?
Tom Wood was the real Magic. Tom is the one that brought everybody together. He's the one that brought everybody to the table, and he steered the ship. He kept things on an even keel.
Here's the next question. How did he do it?
There's not a recipe. Sometimes it's just you sprinkle that magic pixie dust on a certain combination of personalities and it works. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of, I don't know if you could ever recreate that.
You know, it seems like it was lightning in a bottle.
It was.
But you've seen various levels of success from different radio stations since that time. Before we get into that part of it, let's talk about the fall of Magic 105. Tom Wood departs when?
4 years ago? I don't remember because I was so far removed from it at that point.
Okay, so he was still around. What led to Magic 105's demise?
In my opinion?
Yes.
When I joined the station, there was a guy named Dick Booth that owned the station. It was locally owned. He owned that in Cool 95. Mm-hmm. He acquired Kissin'. He was putting together a little cluster of stations, and he got an offer from a company called US Radio to buy him out. But he was going to stay on as their regional president. So I was like, well, you're double dipping. You're selling your company, and they're going to keep you on a management position. You know, wow. So he sells his company and the 3 stations to US Radio, and about 6 months later, Clear Channel at the time, which became iHeart, came in and swallowed US Radio whole. So we ended up under the Clear Channel umbrella. And it was probably 6 months later they started their notorious house cleaning to where we're going to eliminate 20 people here because we can do that job with 3 people here. And they started trying to apply that model to the local station that had been successful for so long. And they took the programming out of Tom's hands. Like, we can do this better than you. And it just, you know, like pulling out Jenga blocks. They pulled out one too many.
I remember, even as a teenager, there was news coverage on KATV the day that Tommy Smith got fired. Mm-hmm. This was a major event. How did it feel being on the inside of it?
I was more on the inside than I care to admit. He actually, do you remember when he quit and came back?
Vaguely. Again, that was what roundabout year was that?
It was late 90s.
Yeah, I was 13, 14, but I was still nerd enough to be paying attention. So, yeah, I mean, I do remember.
I remember the day he quit, and it's the day him and Big Dave split. And I still, to this day, don't know the whole story behind that. But I had just worked an overnight shift. He was coming in as I was getting off work, and I would usually be around a little while doing commercials or whatever before I went home. He came to me in the production room and he said, "Hey, you got an envelope?" Didn't say what he needed an envelope for. So I went in the other room and I got an envelope. And I said, "Here you go." He said, "Thanks." And he walked upstairs. Okay. About 5 minutes later, he comes back downstairs. Our station manager is right behind him saying, "Wait, Tommy, wait, let's talk about this. Wait a minute, we can talk about this." And Tommy walked out. And I went, I just handed him the envelope that he resigned with.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Because this is Tommy Smith. You
Right.
know? This is the Howard Stern of Arkansas.
Yes.
And then about a week later, he came back. And Dave didn't. And I still, to this day, don't know what happened there. I got let go in February of 2000, the day after my birthday, which is the way Clear Channel did things.
Right.
That really soured me on radio. It's like I've poured heart and soul into this for 10 years and I get pushed out the door unceremoniously. They were replacing me with some other programming. I got a job at Nightlife Rocks, a big club that was getting ready to open, as their entertainment director. And I was there for about 1.5 years. Had a good time. I mean, that's still some of my closest family
Sure.
that I work with there. And we hosted a boxing or wrestling event one night, and Baz happened to be there for the buzz. And he pulled me off to the side and, you know, talked to me for a minute, find out how things were going there. And I didn't think anything else about it. And I went in Monday for a manager's meeting and I had a message. "David Basil called for you." Really? He left a number, so I called him back and he wanted me to meet for lunch. So I did. And they had an opening on the Buzz on the morning show for a producer. And he said, "I didn't know if you're wanting to get back into radio or not, but here's an opportunity." Well,
And this is pre-show with no name.
way pre-show.
This is Baz and
Stanley Knox.
Stan Knox, who we don't have to talk about his exit. This is a family-friendly show.
I got him on the way out the door, though.
Okay, fair enough. That's all we need to know. We'll talk about that off air.
So I ended up interviewing with Philip, the owner, and his business manager, Diane, and they hired me to be the producer for the morning show. And I was in that position for almost a year. It was more like 11 months, and Stanley and I butted heads a lot. And it was just because he was stubborn, and once I get my mind set on something, especially if I know I'm right, I'm not going to back down.
Right.
So we butted heads a lot, and he'd had ideas. You know, he came from another place out west, and he'd have ideas, this will be funny, and I'd tell him, it's not going to work here. We're in the Bible Belt, that won't work here, and he'd get mad at me for, you know.
Right.
And I wouldn't do all his crazy little stunts. You know, he wanted me to go out and do this. I said, I'm not going to do this. We're in the South. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And we had a guy on the Point who was the morning show producer over there that I was friends with, called me up one day, and Mike had already approached me and said, would you like to come work for the Point?
And this is Mike Kennedy,
Mike
right?
Kennedy,
Okay,
yes. Right. And my friend was moving. He was going to move to Phoenix, where he was from, and he said, "Hey, I need to borrow your truck after work today if you can help me move a couch to my storage." I said, "Sure." He wanted to get me away from the station. So he did, and he said, "I know Mike has talked to you about going to work for the Point. I just thought it would be fair to let you know that Stanley offered me your job." And I said, "Really?" He said, "We're friends, and I didn't want you to get blindsided, but Stanley's trying to replace you." And I said, "Okay, good to know." So I went back to Mike, and I said, "I'll take that job."
Right.
As soon as I did, Stanley came running back to me begging, "I'll get you more money, I'll get you this, I'll get you that." No, thank you.
It's
like I said, I got him on the way out.
That makes me feel a little bit better. I have noticed, and for those of you who are watching who are fascinated by this as I am,
it's really like high school drama in a lot of ways.
it really is. I remember.
It's not supposed to be.
No, but I mean, but it is, because you're fighting for an audience, and really in high school drama, that's kind of the same thing. Howard Stern in his last book said, he would go home depressed at night. He had 25% of the population of New York City listening to him every single day. And yet he would lament the fact that he did not have the other 3 out of the 4. Was there ever a thought in your mind about, what are my ratings?
No.
Is this something that, was it always purely just about the show?
It's about the show. It's about connecting with people out there. No matter if it's 1 or 100, it doesn't matter.
So we'll go back on the timeline, because we're going to dig into that part of this here in just a little bit. Let's go back to the timeline. You joined The Point. This is mid-2000s, right?
2002.
2002. Okay, so early 2000s. It's really important to note and to put this into context, too. In the early 2000s, The Point was on its way up. The Point's been on its way up since really its inception.
That was the other factor involved in Magic 105's downfall, because they chipped away at the base so much, The Point was able to gain ground.
Right. The Point was on its way up. 103.7 was not what it is currently. Had they already made the flip to the talk format, or were they still 103.7 rock station?
They were doing talk. Philip really wanted that to be successful, the sports talk format. They just never could get the right group and the right formula. I remember Pat Lynch used to do the middays, all politics.
Lyncho's Midday
Lyncho's Midday Buzz. And don't ask me to do my Lyncho impersonation, because it's not good.
Mine isn't either, but everyone's got one. Everyone's got one.
The only thing they really had that was working was Drive Time Sports with Rainwater, and it was statewide, and it was very popular. And that was holding up the station, just the afternoons. Morning show was horrible, and then they had an opportunity to hire Tommy. And they actually came to me and said, should we hire this guy? Is this smart? Because we've heard terrible things about him. And I remember telling the promotions director, I said, if you want to win, you hire that guy.
Right.
Because he knows how to win.
And he has won.
He has won.
He has won.
He came over and he did exactly what he did at Magic 105. He endeared himself to the people because he's one of them.
Right. I've heard the phrase, when I was in the Little Rock market, that one of the more heavier criticisms of Tommy Smith was he was a poor man's Howard Stern. And I reject that premise wholeheartedly.
Never.
Because that's not who Tommy Smith is or was.
No.
And I can't be disingenuous here and pretend like I know the guy. We met and worked together a couple of different times when I was a fill-in producer at The Buzz. And the only reason I got that gig was I was working for Sully at Channel 7. And Acree came by one time and said, hey, we might need some help. All right, cool. I'll make the extra $75 to produce the morning show for a little bit. But that's not who Tommy was at all. Talk to me a little bit about Tommy.
I've known Tommy for close to 30 years now. We worked together for a long time. Him and his beautiful wife. Tommy is an encyclopedia of sports knowledge. Yeah. I've seen him rattle off, ask him who the pitcher was in the World Series of this team in this year. He'll rattle off who the backup was. I mean, he knows, and people for the longest time thought he had a book. He doesn't. Like, he has just got a head full of useless statistics.
Right.
And some people have that. I've got the same thing with music. I've got this library of musical nonsense and history and notes that just rattles around. And it's just stuff I've collected. Tommy has always really cared about the community more than he gets credit for. Like, if there was a tornado, if there was some kind of natural disaster, he actually would get in a truck and drive supplies somewhere for people that needed it. He's always cared more about people. The American Cancer Society billboards he did for years, the Living Billboard he did for years, he always really, really cared. And that's what made it work, is because he connected with people on that level.
We are talking to Jeff Allen. He is one of the biggest personalities in my mind in the entire state of Arkansas as it pertains to radio. You can listen to him on the Point 94.1. Be sure to do that. However, if you're in the market to buy or sell your home, you need to call us. It's 479-968-5668 or cruise on over to RussellvilleLiving.com. Let's touch on something you just said. Useless knowledge and lots of facts, statistics, but that's who you are when it comes to music. When you were growing up, was music a big part of your life?
Music was around me. I had an older sister who's got a degree in music. My next oldest sister was in the band, and she was into music. I took piano lessons when I was very, very young and then joined the band. So I was around music from age 5 on. That's not really what led me to where I am now. It's just I tend to bury myself in what I'm doing. And it's just the way I am. So when I'm on the radio and I'm playing these artists and I'm talking about these artists, I want to know about these artists. I want to be knowledgeable about what I'm doing.
Right.
And I enjoy that.
Sharp and I were having a conversation about just the radio business in general and that connection with people. Talk to me a little bit about the poignant connections that you've made through radio that really kind of stand out to you. Maybe the ones that you didn't even expect to happen.
First thing I'll tell you is a role model that might surprise you a little bit. I learned more from Paul Eels from one encounter. The first time I met Paul, God rest his soul, because I miss him so much. I know a lot of people do. I was the part-time guy at Magic 105. I was nobody. I was the guy that worked Saturday night when somebody else couldn't work. Nobody knew me. I did a boat show remote at the State House Convention Center, and Paul was there for KETV, and he came over to me, knew my name, and introduced himself and asked how I liked working at Magic 105. And I'm floored. How does this guy, who I have so much respect for, know who I am? Because I'm a nobody. But we talked for about 10 minutes that day, and he was more interested in my life.
Yeah.
And I remember how that made me feel. And I've tried to carry that with me. Like, if people want to come up and talk to me, I try to pass that, pay it forward. Like, I want to make people feel the way Paul made me feel.
Yeah. I will share with you my Paul Hill story. About 2 months, 3 months before he died, excuse me, I was even less of a nobody than you were when you met him. I was working as a sports reporter for Tech Television while I was in school.
Okay.
A TV station that actually technically reaches 30,000 homes and was watched by 3 of them, give or take. But we were doing a story on the John Daly Celebrity Golf Tournament that he has every single year, and Paul was there. I was in the process of applying for my internship at Channel 7. I was trying to just soak up any knowledge that I could, and I see Paul Eels walking down the hill. And I don't know if this was true of you. It certainly was true of me. When Razorback games were on, we turned down the volume of the TV.
Oh, yeah.
And you turned Paul up.
You listened to him, yeah.
Right. That's just what you did. And so I thought, okay, now I've got to shoot my shot here. This is Paul Eels. This is who I want to be. I still want to be the voice of the Razorbacks at some point in my career. You know, I still do. And so I decided to shoot my shot, and I walk up to him, and I approach him. And it was exactly the same kind of scenario. He was more interested in me than he really had any business being, because he was Paul Eels. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. The humility that he showed, because I said, you know, sir, I hope that I can be like you.
Yeah.
That's what I want to be. And he said something, it will stay with me forever. He said, son, don't be like me, be better than me.
It sounds like Paul.
And I thought, there is no one better than you. It doesn't happen. And that stayed with me forever.
That's the one thing about Paul. Obviously, everybody misses him. I think the saddest thing about Paul is that more people didn't get to interact with him.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there that watched him, listened to him, that never got to meet him, and I feel sorry for those people.
Yeah.
Because he was a treasure. The last time I saw him, you mentioned a couple months before he died, we were down in the River Market one afternoon. It was middle of summer. I'd worked for the Arkansas Twisters a lot, doing the announcements in the arena. And if you remember, they started a thing with Channel 7 called Everybody's Doing the Paul Call. And they had shirts made up. We were filming a promo for that. So I'm down there with the Twisters and Paul. Paul came over to me and just out of the blue said, Jeff, I don't think we've ever had a picture made together, have we? And he called the photographer, come over here and get a picture of me and Jeff. And he took about 3 pictures. I'm so glad he did that.
Yeah.
Because I've still got those.
Yeah.
But he just went out of his way to come over and say, we need a picture together.
He said one time, and Sully and I talked about this in the office, So he hired me as a sports producer at KATV, and we talked about this because towards the end of his life, he said, "I'm at the twilight of a mediocre career." And in that way, I sort of put him in the same category as some of the greatest musicians I've ever heard or spoken to, because it always seems to me that the most talented musicians are the ones who will say, "I'm not really that good."
The humble ones.
I'm not really that great. And there was nobody who will ever be as close to Paul Eels. There will never be anybody Mike Nail refused to say the phrase touchdown Arkansas the year that he did Arkansas football because of that. He knew it.
Yeah.
He knew it. Are there other mentors that really had an influence on you?
Tom Wood.
Yeah.
My first big time program director. I learned so much from Tom, and Tom is a funny individual. If you've heard him on the air for years, he was on Magic 105. He sounds like your uncle next door. He could sell a drowning man water.
Right.
He's got that voice that just makes everybody fall in love with him. And off the air, he's a riot. He is the funniest guy off the air. And he's golden, both on and off the air, but he is so funny off the air. I learned a lot from him as far as things to do and things not to do and things to avoid doing on the air, things like that. And it's made me a better person. Every time I open that mic, I've got one thing in mind. I'm talking to that person.
Right.
There's one person out there that I'm saying this to. There may be 1,000. There may be 10,000. I don't know. But I got a message for that one person. As long as they hear me, I've done my job.
And you talked about having listened to Magic 105 as a kid, and this was the pinnacle. Does it register with you now, your influence in the state? Does it register with you now, your influence in the business? Is that something you've thought about?
I don't really feel it. Still, I was a part of that. I was gone before the downfall happened.
I'm talking about now.
I know. I've made a mark with the point, and it feels good, but I'm not done yet.
Right. Which actually leads me to the next question. What haven't you done that you still want to do?
Oh man, there's actually quite a bit. There's not a lot of things in work that I still want to do.
Right.
I've pretty much checked all the boxes there. There's things in life I'd still like to do. There's a few countries I'd like to visit. There's a couple of continents I'd like to stand on.
Sure.
You're talking to a guy that went to Ecuador a few years ago just to stand on the equator.
Okay, that's fair.
And we did.
That's fair.
We did. We went down and stood on the equatorial line. And it spent a week down there, and it was a beautiful country. Got to see the beach and got to tour around. But the main impetus for us going was, I want to go stand on the equator in South America.
So you did.
We did.
Right.
It was fun.
Well, yeah. Of course it's fun. But those bucket list items, is that kind of what drives you now?
Sort of. It's just like my trips to Sturgis that people talk about all the time. I'm glad I'm able to do that now.
Sure.
I'm working for a company that supports that. That's a bucket list thing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it was for me. Well, now that I've gone up there, this will be my 5th year. And I've started to know some of the good places to go, some of the good places to ride, some of the good scenery. And, okay, I've already done Mount Rushmore. I've already done this. Let's go this way.
Right.
50 miles over here, there's something else that I've never seen. So there's more places to explore. And so it went from being a bucket list thing to okay, what can I do next?
Well, and I'm in a different place in my life. And so I'm fascinated by people who tell me things like this, because you, in my mind, and I think in the minds of most people who follow this kind of thing, you have reached at least the pinnacle of what it is that Arkansas broadcasting looks like. You're a personality on the #1 radio station.
I guess.
You're highly regarded. You're well known. So what does happen next? What still drives Jeff Allen even after all this success?
What gets me into work and going every morning to do that show is probably the most simple thing. Somebody out there needs me. And that may not mean a lot if you don't understand where I'm coming from with that, but I don't know if you ever got this call. Like if you're ever doing a radio show and you got a call, and then later on you found out how important that call might have been. I got a call today, from a dear friend that just lost his son unexpectedly.
Yeah.
I was one of the first calls he made because he holds me in that high regard as a friend. And that is important to me, that I was there for him because he needed me to be. But I remember getting a call one night when I was working overnights from a guy, and he didn't sound good on the phone. He called the request line out of the blue. I have no idea the guy's name still, but I just know he called me, and he didn't sound good. And I talked him off the ledge. I just talked to him. And then about a week later, I got a call from a girl thanking me for saving her brother's life because he was suicidal, and he called me. That made a difference.
It's so strange because I know as of this recording, as we're typing this, we've not aired Sharp's interview. So these folks haven't seen it as we're recording this. But Sharp tells a very similar story. I never worked an overnight shift where I had to do that. And I'm thankful for that. Now, I've worked in ministry where I've had to do that. So, I mean, there is still some of that. When you put it into that perspective, though, can it still be about the show when you're?
Yeah.
I mean, can it still be about that?
I feel like that part of it, I'm providing a public service, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm the steady hand that somebody needs. Mm-hmm. By being in that spot. That's the steady, regular thing that people are comfortable with, that they need on a daily basis, whether they realize they need something or not. I'm there if they do. I also want to entertain at the same time, though. That's kind of been my golden rule for the last year and a half with all the bad news in the world. I've intentionally tried to not talk about that. Like, okay, everybody else is talking about this. Let me talk about this instead.
Yeah.
Because somebody out there's sick of hearing that, so they want to hear something else.
That's actually the genesis of this show. You know, how do you market real estate? Well, you market the place that you live. You talk about good things that are happening here.
Good positive things.
I mean, something that makes people happy, makes them proud to live where they live. Speaking of that, you live in Russellville. Mm-hmm. It's a long commute.
I knew you were going to say that.
Why do you still live here?
It's not really a long commute. It depends on your point of view.
Okay.
And I'll try to put this into context. I get asked a lot, wow, you really drive that far to work? Actually, no. I drive that far to get home from work.
Yeah.
It takes me about an hour on the freeway, an hour in the car. When I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, it took me an hour to get to work.
Right.
But it was 15 miles. When I lived in Nashville, Tennessee, I lived north of town. It's now the Arts District up there now. It was close to an hour drive to the station downtown in traffic. It's relative.
Right.
Would you rather be behind the wheel for an hour in stop-and-go traffic, or would you rather be running speed limit on the freeway, listening to some music, or thinking about something you're going to talk about, or just collecting your thoughts? Or
I asked that question only because I anticipated that was probably going to be your answer.
Okay. I like to drive.
Well, and the reason why is I did the same thing. When I was working at Channel 7 and then splitting time at ARN, I lived in Dardanelle, and then we had a place in Plainview I would stay in sometimes. Plainview to Little Rock.
That's a long drive.
If you go Highway 10, it's gorgeous. There's no cell phone signal. It's nothing. And you could talk and you could think about, okay, these are the high points that you want to hit on the show today. This is what you want to do. You can listen to music. You can get lost in everything.
You can.
For somebody whose life is public and whose job is very public, do you think that commute, as it were, is necessary for the decompression side of things?
It helps.
Yeah,
it definitely helps. When I leave the office, it takes me an hour or so to get home. But when I get home, that's way over there.
Right.
There are people here I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
I can go downtown and run into somebody I know that I went to school with. It's comfortable.
Is it strange at this point in your career to have people come up and talk to you, not because you're Russellville Jeff Allen, but because you're .94.1 Jeff Allen?
Not really. It happens. It's part of it.
What is the strangest encounter you've ever had?
Strange. I don't know if we can say that on this telecast.
Okay, what's the strangest one we can talk about on a family show?
Probably strangest. I had a stalker.
Okay, that's all right. Didn't anticipate that.
It started very innocently. State Fair a few years ago, we were out there doing a pre-broadcast. I think REO Speedwagon might have been playing that. I don't remember, but I was out there with the station van, and a girl just walked up and said, "My friends went off and left me. Do you mind if I stand here and wait for them?" Sure. I'm just loading up gear. You wouldn't think twice about that.
Right.
So the following weekend, I did an appearance down in North Little Rock at a restaurant. We were giving away a big trip, and I didn't notice it, but that same girl had showed up at that broadcast, but I didn't see her. And then I got a letter in the mail to the station that I watched you from across the bar while you were giving away that trip. Who is this? It sent me a letter.
Right.
Where did this come from? Well, then it started getting worse, and I started getting letters like every other day, every 3 days. I'd get a letter from this girl, and she started writing my last name after her name in the return address. And it turned out she lived in the Hot Springs area, so when I went down to Oaklawn, she started showing up at my Oaklawn broadcast, bringing me stuffed animals and flowers. Okay, no. And I tried to be nice and like, look, this is not, no.
Right.
And it got worse and worse and worse. And to the point that I went to our station management and I said, look, can you do something? Because this is getting a little creepy. I've got a stack of letters from this girl like this big.
That's amazing to me.
That really will creep you out. Because if you've ever seen the movie Play Misty for Me.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this.
Right. I don't want to involve.
I'll be polite and nice to everybody, but you crossed the line when you started writing my name on the return address of your letters.
Right.
Okay. I need to nip this in the bud.
Yeah, you live in a reality that does not exist.
Yeah.
I never had a stalker. So I want to preface that by saying you win on that. But one night in Walmart, I was going for a Lucky Charms run. You know, sometimes at midnight you just
need Lucky Charms. Those marshmallow treats.
Right, they're delicious. So I walk in and I'm late night Walmart runs. I've seen you more in Walmart at 3 o'clock in the morning than I have almost anybody else, as we think alike in that
Our
way.
secret's out.
Right, exactly. So I really wish they'd go back to 24 hours.
So do I.
I'm in the cereal aisle and I see this large behemoth of a man in overalls and no shirt, and he is looking at me like I owe him money. You know, he's just kind of giving me the one of these, like trying to figure out who I am, sort of a thing. And so I pick up my Lucky Charms and I take off the opposite direction, hoping to just, as I'm creeped out, but I don't know exactly what's happening. Well, then I turn and I notice that this guy is following me.
Oh no!
And I'm like, okay, this is. There's no way that this is anything other than he's just going the same direction I happen to be going. So I turn into another aisle, and Jeff, he says, "Hey, you." And I went, "Oh, my God, this is how I'm going to die. I'm going to get murdered by a shirtless, overall-wearing man in the middle of the cereal aisle, and I didn't even get to eat my Lucky Charms."
3 a.m.
At 3 a.m. This is somehow appropriate. He said, "I know who you are." And I'm thinking, I hope I did not date his daughter.
You start thinking through
Right.
your mental Rolodex, okay, what could I have possibly done?
Right. Who is this man and why do I know him? So a little backstory. In the early 2010s, I got a gig, random gig. You picked up random gigs when you're doing stuff like this, as a pro wrestling ring announcer.
Okay.
For some local independent shows around the area. And you get paid, I don't know, $150.
Michael Buffer's birthday happens to be today.
as we record this. Really?
Yeah.
Well, let's get ready to rumble.
Can't say that. You'll have to pay him.
Yeah, well, I didn't finish it. Sorry, Michael. I was a ring announcer. And this guy says, "You're that guy from the wrestling."
Wow.
And I said, yes, yes, I am. It's a pleasure. I have a good night. This man starts to engage a conversation about, and I swear to you, I've never in my life thought I'd say this sequence of words, modern wrestling philosophy and the theory behind it.
Wow.
The intellect that he put into professional wrestling was fascinating, but it was not something I wanted to discuss with a shirtless man in the middle of Walmart at 3 a.m. Any other strange tales you'd like to share with
I got a good
class?
wrestling story.
Okay.
Oh, really? I know we only had like 30 minutes, didn't we?
No, we're fine.
Okay.
It's my show. We're fine.
Back when Barton Coliseum still hosted a lot of events, this was before Simmons Alltel, whatever it was called back then, was built. Everything still went to Barton. We hosted, at Magic 105, we hosted a wrestling night. And I remember Hacksaw Duggan was one of the big stars. Heartbreak Kid was one of the big stars. It was that era.
Okay.
A father had reached out to me ahead of time. He had a son that was disabled. Brought him to the event, and the young boy had to travel in a wheelchair with a nurse. I believe, I can't remember exactly what his ailment was. It was terminal, though. It was something that there was really not a lot they could do for him, but other than just keep him comfortable. And he got there and asked me, he said, "Is there any way you can get one of the wrestlers to just come out and say hi to my son? It would make his world." So I'm backstage. I went over to the guy in charge, the promoter, and I said, "Look," I said, "this guy, one of our listeners, brought his son. You can see he's standing there with his nurse. He just wants a wrestler to come over and say hi to his kid. Is there anything you can do?" "Well, they're pretty busy. They're getting ready for a big show. I don't know." Great. So I'm kind of standing there thinking, what am I going to do? I really want to make this happen for this guy. And Heartbreak, HBK didn't have time. All these guys didn't have time. About that time, Hacksaw Duggan comes charging out of the dressing room. Bigger than life.
Right.
Yelling down the hall, "Hey, I hear there's a kid out here looking for me." And he comes charging down the hall with his 2x4.
Right.
Or 4x4. And he walks over and he spots the kid in the wheelchair and gets a big grin on his face and walks right over to him, kneels down on one knee and says, "How you doing, buddy?" That kid's face lit up. And he sat there and talked to him for about 5 minutes. And I may get choked up telling you the story. It was more than anybody could have asked of him to do that. And he said, "Well, buddy, I gotta go wrestle. You're gonna watch me, right?" And he talked and he walked off. And I got a letter about a year later from his dad telling me his son had passed. But he talked about that every day up until the last. How big that was, the biggest moment in that kid's life. You meet so many good people doing what we do. You meet a lot of people that are not so great. And it's those guys really stand out. The ones that'll take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
When it matters.
I've met more of those guys than I have the negative ones.
I have too.
And it seems...
Thankfully.
Yeah, and I know that they're out there. Absolutely, I know that they're out there. I had a listener when I was on ESPN in Fayetteville. And you really do develop a connection with these people. And when he passed, I was invited to his funeral. But we had never actually...
I get it.
We had never actually, officially met, but he called into the show. We talked hogs. He would Facebook message me. Even after I left the market, we had discussions constantly. And it was, I was kind of floored by that. It's like, I mourned this guy's passing. I truly did. But to think that his wife would reach out and say, "Hey, it would mean a lot to come to the funeral."
I get it. The thing that we as broadcast people have to realize, like you said, we're public figures.
Yeah.
We're in the spotlight. people hear my voice every day. There are people out there that I may have never met or even spoken to that feel like they know me somehow because they hear me every day.
Right.
It's the person you talk to every day, whether you talk to them or not. And so that's why you have to treat each one of those the same way. You do develop relationships with people, just like the guy that called me today and told me he just lost his son. And we are friends, you know.
Right.
I had a friend that would send me a Christmas card every year, Robert. He was an older fellow, but his mother would bring him up to the station to pick up prizes that he won because he was not all mentally there. And this guy was winning prizes for me when I was working the overnight shift at Magic 105. He followed me across town to the point and continued sending me holiday cards every year. I mourned last year when I got the word that he'd passed away.
Right.
And a lot of other radio people did too. Really? They couldn't believe it. Got a letter from his mother thanking me and wanting me to thank everybody at the station for treating her son so special because we made him feel special.
Right.
You develop those relationships.
It fundamentally changes how you view human connection.
It does.
It really does, because you start to notice, and I've not had anywhere close to the same kind of interactions that you have. I've had them on a far more local level. But you do start to think that, okay, there's two moods of a broadcaster, I really feel. Hey, I'm really doing well, and I'm making a genuine connection, and this is working. Or B, nobody cares about anything I've ever done in the history of my life. At least that's where my brain goes. That's probably not healthy.
It is what it is.
Right, but it is what it is. Do you have a similar kind of sense of things? Or are you more even keel at this point?
I'm more even keel.
Good. I'm hoping to get that way at some point.
I'm going to go in there every day, and I'm going to do what I do, and if I do something funny along the way, you just happen to be along for the ride.
Right. Jeff, we could do this all day.
I know.
Or at least I could.
I could too.
So can we do it again?
Sure.
All right. Outstanding. Thank you so much for coming in and doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Shooting the breeze. This is, before we go, one question I do have.
Okay.
You are a Russellville native.
Mm-hmm.
You are well known throughout the state. What do people need to know about this place that makes it so special?
Russellville is a great town. A lot of good people. There's a lot of history here. There's a great college. There's a great school system. And it's close enough geographically to some of the bigger things that you might need. It's really a great place to live.
It's pretty much a perfect way to end this show. Jeff Allen, thanks so much. We're going to do this again.
Let's do it.
All right. Jeff Allen, Point 94.1. You can listen to him. Do not miss his show. I don't care what you are doing. Do not miss his show. Now, as this is recorded, the signal's going to be down for a couple of days as they move the transmitter around.
You heard me.
Right? Isn't that right?
You heard me.
Okay, so I was listening. I was listening. But he'll be back to full strength next week, so make sure to tune into that. That is our show. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, if you're in the market to buy or sell your home, give us a call today, 479-968-5668. I'm Drew Brent. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.